Now, let's talk about something a little bit different. Position. Position has two attributes, the type of position and where you want the positioning to be. The three types of positions that we're going to talk about today are absolute, fixed, and relative. An example of an absolute position is something like Google. If you notice the top of Google, the search bar, as you scroll, the search bar stays at the top and it goes away. If we go to a website like W3 Schools and we look at this header, as you scroll, it stays with the page. That's an example of a fixed positioning. Now let's talk about relative positioning. We are going to use positioning on our image. First you type position, then relative. Now let's say I wanted to affect the left side of our image. I would type left. Let's do about 50 pixels. This means that it will move the image 50 pixels from the left. So as I click refresh, you can see that our image moved 50 pixels from the left. You can also do bottom, top, and right. Obviously, top and bottom would contradict one another, as would right and left. So typically you would want either left or right, and either top or bottom. So let's say that we wanted to move it from the bottom about 10 pixels. And we refresh, and the image moves up, exactly what we wanted. So let's say we changed our relative position to absolute. Remember that absolute is according to the page. So if we click Save, we would expect our image to be in the bottom left-hand corner. And as you can see, it's there. So to recap, relative positioning is according to its original location. Absolute positioning is according to the page. And fixed positioning is according to the browser.
So let's talk about margins and padding. So if you look at my screen right here, so we have the content, and then there's a border. There's a border around every single element in HTML. We've actually already drawn one of those borders in yellow. Now on the outside of a border, there's a margin, and on the inside of the border, there's padding. There's a native size to each of these elements in the browser, and we can edit those with CSS. So if you'll notice on the page here, the edge of the text on the page is actually touching the border, and that doesn't look so good. So what we can do, we can edit the padding within the border so that way there's more spacing between the border and the actual content. So if I were to go to the border here, I can type padding and then 20 pixels. So if I were to go back to the page, everything is pushed 20 pixels inward from the border. Now, when you just put 20 pixels, that edits all the different sides of the border. But you can also just edit the top, bottom, left, or right. So I could say padding 20 pixels, and then I could also add 60 pixels. Now if you go back to our page, you'll notice that everything was pushed in from the sides. When you have two values in padding, the first value affects the top and the bottom, and the second value affects the left and the right. Now let's just say I wanted to add a third value. Let's do 100 pixels. We save and then go back to our page. You'll notice that the border was actually pushed downward. That's because when you have three of those, the first value affects the top border, the middle value affects the left and the right, and then the last value affects the bottom. Now we can go one step further and add a fourth. And let's just have that be at something crazy large, like 500 pixels, because we feel like it. So if we were to save that and go back to our page, you'll notice that everything was moved around. The first value affects the padding from the top. The second value affects the padding from the right. The third affects from the bottom, and the fourth affects from the left. So it kind of goes around just like a compass. And that's how margins work too. I could do the exact same thing, only instead of padding, I'll type margin. And when I go back to the page, you'll notice that the box has changed size because we got rid of the padding. The margin from the left is very large because that's the last value, and it's pushed ever so slightly on the different sides, so it was moved just by the margins of the element. And so that's kind of how margins and padding works. You can use it to position things within elements and around certain elements. So now we've seen how to position everything on the page and with each other. but there might be times where different things kind of intersect each other, and we want to fix that. So let's adjust everything a little bit on the page and see what we can do. I'm going to take out the margins on that div, go back to our page, and it's back to normal again. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually move our image so that way it's at a fixed position, and I'm going to have it be the left 400 pixels, and then from the top, I'm going to have it be 50 pixels. So when I go back to the page, you'll notice that the image is actually overlapping with the border. So this actually looks kind of fun, and you can really position elements in interesting ways. But if you do it this way, you might have some things that you want to be on top of each other on the page, so that way everything is layered right. Let's just say we actually want that border to be on top of the image and not below it. What we can do is add a z-index. When I add a z-index to my elements, I have to make sure that the position value is set, so position fixed, and I'm going to add z-index. And I'm just going to make it something like 1. Which means it's a pretty low element. Z-index are the layers on the page. 0 is the deepest part, and then the higher the number goes, the more it will be layered towards you. So if we have the z-index of 1, that's at a pretty low level. Now, if I were to go to our div and then add a relative position, and then not edit too much there, but then add a z-index, and let's just say that z-index is 5. We know that 5 is greater than 1, obviously, so when we go to our page, you'll notice that the border and the entire div is actually above our image now. So you can edit the layering on your page with z-index.